Hey guys, so I think this is probably close to the end of the semester, or probably the last lecture that you'll see in this semester. But anyway, today we're going to talk about assistive technology, and I'm going to try and do something a little bit different. What I really want to do is I want to give you some exposure, some different kinds of stuff, and there are so many different visuals, products, services, whatever that you can see regarding assistive technology. So this is going to be, again, I know I'm just a broken record, but this is going to be scratching the surface because assistive technology is almost an accumulation of all the things that we have right now that help people live better lives, more functional lives. But in another way, you could say it's all the stuff that hasn't yet been invented yet, too, because there are so many creative opportunities for us to say, here's an individual who this kind of product might work for them, but it needs to be tweaked. And that hasn't even been made yet. So we have to make a new thing that's specifically for this person. So there's just so much opportunity to think broadly here. If you have that kind of engineering mind that says there are new products and new services, new way of doing things, new way of thinking about things, those that's really the spirit of what assistive technology is. So let's chat about that for a second here before I show you some bunch of video clips and pictures of different kinds of technology that we're talking about here. So first of all, assistive technology, let's just get a definition so we have some sort of common understanding. But basically, in layman's terms, anything that makes life easier or makes us more functional is assistive technology. This is not just for people with disabilities, this is for all of us. So when the search engine came out, Google and Bing and what were the original ones, like Netscape Navigator, I think? That was like a web browser, but also kind of a search function too. I'm dating myself here. But when the internet searches came about, that sure made it easier to find things, right? Amazon shopping makes shopping easier. And so, in a sense, it assists us. It's a new technology. And so, broadly speaking, it fits the definition. Here's the Assistive Technology Act 2004 definition. Any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. Blah, blah, blah. It basically means the same thing. If it makes life easier, it works. So when we talk about assistive technology, there's this broad sense of like it could be anything that makes us more functional. Usually when we use the term in rehab counseling, we're specifically referring to accommodating people with disabilities and getting up to sort of like average or normal functioning or what used to be their normal functioning or something like that. So there's kind of this like technical term and there's the broad range definition of it. We're going to kind of operate in both. I don't think it'll be too confusing necessarily, but assistive technology can be either high tech or low tech, and we'll refer to both of these. You'll see examples of both of this. So high tech could be there's a new iPad and some software developer programmed an app specifically for memory recall of daily activities or something. Did you remember to check that the door was locked before you left the house? And people go through and click on it and it pops up, and some of them make noises and some of them are just reminders and blah, blah, blah. But the point is that it's a high tech thing. You need a device, you need somebody who knows coding and how to like build that software to do those things on that system. And there are multiple examples: robotics, software, hardware, just so many different things. We'll see some of those. Low tech is literally as simple as if I have a surgery and I can't get up because my knee is, braced in place, I have a grabber thing with a little squeegee handle, the kind that pick up trash on the highways and stuff. I can reach across, I can grab the remote control, set it on my lap, and watch TV for the rest of the day, or whatever it is that I do. But it can be literally as easy, just as an extension of my arm because I can't get up and walk across the room. That's low tech, right? So, this is just sort of a kind of a weird example, but before a comb existed, people had to just run their fingers through their hair. And I'm sure everybody was having a bad hair day back in like the Neanderthal days. Nobody combed their hair. But when somebody said, I could really use a tool that would make my hair a little bit better looking, whatever the heck that looks like. For those of us that don't comb our hair, we just wake up and kind of shake it off in the shower and then, go to work. But for those who do use combs, it makes a difference, right? And so that piece of technology assisted us and makes us more functional, better than our fingers, right? So that's what we're talking about. Hopefully that gives you kind of a sense of what we're speaking of generally and specifically about high tech and low tech. Another thing to remember too is that the most effective device is one that individuals are willing and able to use in their own environment to meet their goals. And the key word is their goals, not our goals. In the medical model, which we've talked about over and over through this semester, you get a doctor who says, well, you have a broken arm, and now I'm going to give you this assistive thing that's going to hold your arm in place. And they prescribe it, and they say, you need to wear this, otherwise your arm's not going to set. And there is a place for us to hear from experts, or for our clients to hear from our expertise to say, here's something I think would work, because they don't know, right? I don't know what splint is the best. I don't know what arm sling or arm brace or whatever. I don't know what's the best. But I also have to make choices about what I want and what I'm going to actually use. So this is where, as counselors, we build these collaborative relationships to say, what do you want? I mean, here are the options. This is why this one's good. Here's why this one isn't so good. You might use this in these circumstances, and this one you'd use in other circumstances. This one would be good for sports, but this one's better around the house because it's a little more comfortable or something like that. There's all kinds of ways you can describe that. And that's where our expertise comes in. And then we say, here's one that might, I think, work for you. What do you think? And they're like, yeah, okay, I'll try it out. And they come back and they're like, no, this was stupid. I don't want to wear this one, or I don't want to use this thing, or whatever. And I'll be like, all right, whatever. It's not like you're being resistant. It just means it's not working for you. This is across the board. I don't want to use this prosthetic because it makes me feel embarrassed when I go out and all my friends talk about it or other people notice it or whatever. But this other one, it's a little more subtle and people don't mention it as much. And so I like this one better because it helps my self-concept feel a little more confident going out of the house. We'll talk about this too, but like when it comes to prosthetics, some people prefer more realistic looking ones because then it doesn't look like a hook or a piece of shiny metal. Some people really prefer kind of like the high tech, maybe like graphite looking piece of equipment. And that's just is individual differences. So when we say the most effective one, it's not that the most effective one provides the most functioning. We could say, there's an argument to be made for this new high-tech robotic device that hooks up to the electrical impulses in your arm. Maybe that's the most functional one for doing certain things, but if the person doesn't want it, it's a useless hunk of crap. Like nobody cares about it, right? So this is the spirit of what we're going to try and do when we work with somebody who needs some assistance is say, well, what works for you? What's the best for you? So that's what we're talking about. Also, needs change over time. People adapt. People's lives turn differently. They might say, I want something that looks decent and it looks nice. But then later they're like, yeah, it looks nice, but it doesn't work and I don't use it. So I want something that actually works. And you say like, all right, well, you change, me too. Good. Now we're getting somewhere. So taking these few principles in mind, we're going to talk more about what the tools themselves are and less about how to counsel somebody through the process. But just know that that's a really, really important piece. I think we'll come back to that and touch on it a little bit. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I now have these different categories. We're going to talk about mobility, posture control, and transfers. Here's a bunch of different YouTube videos. I'm not going to show all of them, but I'm going to pick some select few. And this is going to be a little clunky because I've never done this before, but I'm going to choose a couple. I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to open them up, get past all the dumb YouTube commercials and all that stuff. And then I can just sort of show you an example of at the places where these, like the timestamps on the videos, I can show you what these are, just examples of them. Some of them I'm not going to show you. I'm just going to let you, I'll describe it and you can go see them yourselves, or if you kind of have a sense of what it already is. But I want to show you a few things that I think they'd be really interesting, and some are unique enough, and just to highlight a few principles about them. So I'm going to pause the video now and come back in just a sec. Okay, here's the first one. So this is Lindsay. I literally just typed like transfer board or something into YouTube and she popped up. But what she has here is she's going to transfer from her chair to a toilet, and she's got a little piece of, I forget what she called it. It's some rubbery thing that, it's like a piece of paper that's rubbery that basically keeps this thing, when she sets it on the toilet, from sliding. So that as she puts that on there, she puts a little weight on it, doesn't slip out and be not a good situation. But as far as assistive technology goes, this is a piece of plywood. Nothing much more than that. It's not a super fancy thing, but this is one of the most functional pieces of equipment that somebody who uses a wheelchair can have, absolutely. And so somebody would have probably, it's likely to have a couple of these in different places, maybe even different sizes. Keep one in the car, one in the bathroom at home, one maybe sort of tucked into a chair. I don't know exactly how many is typical for people to have. But there are different shapes, and this little finger cutout is for ease of use. I mean, this is not a complicated piece of machinery, but as far as like exponential improvements in quality of life, this is it. And oftentimes, and I mean this literally, so much more often, the cheapest, easiest, most simple tool are the ones that are the most effective, like this. So let's take a look at, let's watch her for a second.
Just a brief or underwear, too much skin is exposed and you tend to stick. So having something that covers your backside but is easy enough to remove once you get over to the toilet is perfect. Okay, so back to the slide board. We're going to insert the wedge underneath our hip as far as we can. Okay. And then we're going to simply, now you can see I have a little bit of a height difference between my seat cushion and this. And as you go, and this is where your caregiver is going to need to be keeping a close eye on you, make sure that you can get past the wheel, which is behind me. You're going to move slowly. If you had a caregiver, they'd be in front of you helping you slide across. Pressing slowly. I can use this other handrail all the way down onto the toilet seat. At this point, then, we would pull this out.
That's probably all we need to look at for that one. Thank you, Lindsay. You've been a great assistant. No, I'm kidding. She's probably smarter than I am at this stuff. These are the things you can do if you get out into practice and you start meeting people and you start seeing, they start saying, well, how do I have this new problem. How do I do with this? And you're like, oh, I don't know. I should do some research. YouTube is like the best place to go because as far as there's this academic research that happens and that's important and that's what academics get to do. I get to write papers and do some statistics and all that kind of stuff. But research in another sense is you finding out solutions to people's real life problems or real life needs, something like that. And so when I have stuff like that, when I need to learn how to shut the maintenance light off in my car, I go to YouTube every single time. When I need to learn how to fix something around my house, I go to YouTube. When I need to learn how to cook a new kind of dinner because we're bored of all the other stuff that we have, I go to YouTube. So if you're looking for solutions, use Reddit, use YouTube, use wikis all over the internet. There are different kind of wikis for stuff like this. Use your resources and also Facebook groups of other people who have been in similar situations. Fantastic sources for this stuff. So you're going to be looking at videos just like this to say, well, what does that actually look like? I'm not going to go through them all here. We don't have time in our educational process. But even if you're doing therapy, how are these therapeutic techniques? Let's go to conferences. Let's watch recorded videos, that kind of stuff. That's what you'll be doing to find out how this stuff works and what's already been done and who's making what and all that kind of stuff. Okay, I want to show you another example. I'm not going to go through all these, like I said, but the Sip and Puff powered wheelchair. A lot of people get really curious about what that is and how that works and just want to see some examples of these kind of things. So I'm also going to pause the video here again, and I'll come back in a second. Okay, here we go for another one. We're going to talk about the Sip and Puff wheelchair. This guy, by the way, if you want to see these actual videos, you can just sort of type in part of this in YouTube, and you should be able to find it. This guy's really funny. I watched most of this video. I didn't see the whole entire thing, but most of it is really funny. So let's just take a peek at what he's doing here.
To turn it,
it's super quiet, I know, I'm sorry.
It's like second nature. Sip on it lightly, turn to the left, puff on it lightly, and turn to the right. I can do a little combination.
So it's a little hard to hear probably what he's doing. But basically he's going, not breathing in necessarily, but sucking just like a straw. And you're that's why they call it a sip and not a suck. It's not suck and blow, it's sip and puff. So you're going and pushing out air, not going blowing a lot. But it's just simple, light little movements of air that turn, move forward, backward. There's all different combinations of how you can blow and suck into this thing. This up here is just a water tube, in case you're curious about what that's for, just for hydration. Nothing much more complicated than that. But for somebody who if a person has functioning of their arms, even a little bit, even if they can only kind of push with the heel of their hand, they might be able to use a joystick, which provides a little bit more mobility. But in his case, he doesn't have that. So he was talking about in the video, and I've seen all kinds of different versions of this. There are kinds where, if you're familiar with Google Glass, where you put on the glasses, and there's like a camera that sees your eyeballs, and you can see where you're looking and that kind of stuff. It's a little bit more low tech than, not low tech, I guess, but it's a little bit less high tech than that. But you can use your eyeballs to move and rotate the chair and move forward and backward and that kind of thing, just based on where you're looking with your eyes. That's an option. There's another one where you can like put this thing around your head, and just by tipping your head different directions, you can steer with your using your neck. So there's all kinds of different versions of this. And the one that's going to make the most sense for the person is depending on what do they like, what works and what doesn't. What does their environment look like as far as like where they're navigating? I'm just throwing out ideas here, but like if they're in a busy urban center and they're going to be looking around a lot, looking for traffic and potential hazards, you're probably not going to want like a neck steering thing. I'm just kind of guessing here, but just using the environment to decide what's going to be the best situation for somebody. So anyway, those are some examples of that. The stairway lift I'm not going to show you, but you've probably seen examples of this on TV. There have been commercials for decades. It's just literally a chair that goes onto the side of the stairs, usually mounted to the wall, and then you can transfer into that chair, move up the stairs. It's often not for people who are in wheelchairs, although it could be. But it's also for people who are just like, I can ambulate with a walker or a cane or something, but I can't necessarily climb the stairs. Either because I have trouble lifting my legs or just too much pain or whatever. So you can use this chair to get up the stairs, but then you can walk on a flat surface, upstairs, downstairs, whatever. There are versions of a home elevator that sometimes can be, according to this manufacturer on this video, it looks like a little, like, those tubes at the bank that you put your checks into and it goes, it sucks you up into the, sucks your thing up into the, back into the bank tellers. It kind of looks like that. Of course, it doesn't move that fast, but you walk into it and it just brings you up a flight of stairs. According to this manufacturer, it's like around the same cost, and so they were, making the pitch that this could be a reasonable option depending on whether you have stairs. If you don't have stairs, then obviously a stair lift you wouldn't want to put in, but if an elevator makes more sense given this person's circumstances, then maybe that's the better option. Who knows? Depends on the individual and their home and the shape of their house and the architecture and that kind of stuff. By the way, if this is something you ever get into, there's a specific I don't know if it's a certification or just some sort of designation that contractors can get. The builders who, if they understand ADA law and disability and they understand sort of what the parameters are of like measurements and angles, there's all kinds of specific things that say this is accessible versus this other thing that isn't. People who know accessibility and can build to those specifications can really be a good resource when you're thinking about, I need to modify someone's home and I need a builder who really knows how to work with me. There are few, there's not that many, but depending on where you are, it can be easier or harder to find. I know that in rural Iowa, when I was there, it was really hard to find somebody who knew about accessibility. So as a counselor, even though my specialty is not construction, I know about disability, and I was often advising other contractors, and I shouldn't say often, this happened from time to time. I would advise people on, here's what the ADA law is trying to accomplish. I don't know building codes, but I can help you get to where they are, and so you can navigate through those a little bit if they're willing to do the work, which is also another thing, is finding someone who's willing to do that. But I started to pick up more and more knowledge about, like, I know that this bath rail has to be this many inches off the ground in order to meet accessibility standards, and I would tell contractors that. And all of a sudden I found myself learning more and more about building, and then it just became kind of this like extra interest and expertise area that I had that I just sort of fell into. You might fall into knowing a lot about wheelchairs or about construction code standards or medical devices like walkers or whatever it is. But that's just one of those things that you build an expertise in over time. Anyway, a little bit of a side note. Walkers, excuse me, we all know what walkers are. We've seen them around. There are multiple different kinds and different arrangements of They're the kind with tennis balls in the front that slide. Some people need that. There are kinds with stationary wheels that just move forward and backward, and those can be helpful for balance too. You don't necessarily want casters that are going to rotate like your shopping cart wheels and stuff. This video is really interesting about canes. We've all probably seen somebody with a cane who is visually impaired using that cane for different things. There are different kinds of canes for different kinds of functions. I think this video is not one of them, but when I did a Google search or a YouTube search or whatever, there were a ton of different kinds, some of them that had like new vibration technologies that can give you more information. There's one like some like startup company or something was really selling this one hard, where they were like, this is going to revolutionize the way you move around, even if you have sight or something, you know. They were trying to get this like universal design principle, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which basically means this could make anybody's life better, whether you can see or not. And they were saying like, this gives you more information about your environment or whatever. Could be true, might not be true. Time will tell if that product makes everybody's life better or whatever, but lots of different options for canes. This video is kind of cool because it gives you some description of some canes just have a stationary end, like a little tapping end of a stick basically. Others have a little rolling ball on it that rotates or rolls back and forth. Some are made with different materials, so they make different sounds and are sensitive to different kinds of surfaces, like grass versus brick versus cobble versus tile, or that kind of thing. That tells people information about their environment. So that's related to mobility. I didn't do anything necessarily on posture control, but there's a bunch of stuff as far as braces and things too that are options there. Okay, let's keep rocking. Transportation. So I don't want to go into I'll click on one of these as far as adapted driving. But if a person doesn't have the functioning of their feet, they can still drive, but the vehicle has to be modified in some way. And the modifications really depend on what a person needs and what functioning they have of their hands, and which hand they function with the best, and all those things. So this really requires somebody, and there are special companies that do this. It requires somebody who understands how do you build something that works for this specific person. So somebody with a little bit of creativity. And so let's look at an example. I'm going to pause again and we'll come back in just a sec. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Okay, try again. Okay, let's look at a couple of these here. First of all, I'm going to just kind of let this one roll because it's a little louder. You can hear it a little better.
Hand controls are simply devices that allow the person to operate the vehicle's gas and brake with their hands. Every set of hand controls is not the same. There are so many different types out there. There are right-sided hand controls, left-sided hand controls. There's mechanical hand controls, and then there's more power-assisted or electronic hand controls.
So right now I'm driving the vehicle with some mechanical hand controls. So there's no electronics involved, and I'm using a lever system over here. And so I will push forward to engage the brake, and then I'll push down to use the gas. And that's known as a push right angle system. The other part of the system
so I'm not going to watch a whole ton of that, but I don't know if you could hear that or not, but he's using mechanical controls to turn the wheel, that little knob. And then on the other side, he's got a handlebar. Push forward to touch the brake, pull back to apply the gas. We'll see another example of something similar to this in just a second. But as far as the push-pull thing goes, it's connected via like levers, and I'm going to really show my lack of knowledge here about automotive situations, but pushes forward to pull the brake. It's connected by like cables and wires and that kind of thing. Sometimes there are electronic parts, and sometimes there are just mechanical parts. And so somebody who knows about cars can figure that out and how that works. But let me show you this other example. This one's really quiet, and so I'll probably just kind of narrate here. In fact, let me just put it on mute, and I'll do a little bit of narrating over the top. So she was saying in this video that she only has the use of one arm, although clearly you can see she can use both. But one of them works better and is more stable and is safer. In other words, it's not that the other one can't move. It's that it's not safe to rely on it in situations where she may need to use the other one. So that's another consideration too. We're not just talking about, let me pause for a second while I make this point. we're not just talking about can you use the thing, but can you use it safely in all situations in order to keep yourself safe on the road. It's so easy for us. We talked about this and we're talking about stigma. It's so easy for us to say, well, this person's walking, so why do they have a handicap access pass to park the closest spot? And somebody else is looking on being like, that's not fair. But we're talking about something completely different here. And we know this as counselors or people with disabilities, that somebody might have that because they can't walk long distances before they fatigue, or they can walk, but it's unsafe for them to walk too long before they start having flare-ups when they get home, as far as like physical pain or, you know, their immune response or something like that. So other people don't necessarily understand this, which is why we as counselors have this special expertise. She can use her hand, but this one's more reliable. Anyway, so what she's got here is another one of these push-pull systems, and we're going to see her use that. And we can't, again, we're not going to be able to hear this. But one of the things she's talking about in the video is that all of those things we do with our feet, okay, that was just her using the, she has the push start button here. When you get in the car, this is how we think as counselors who work with these kind of things. When you get in the car, you have to apply your foot to the brake before you hit the start button, right? Okay, so she just did that. She pushed the brake forward with her hand, which is a different way of thinking. It takes getting used to this. But she applies the brake with her hand, hits the start button. Now she can pull it back. And this looks like, you can hear it in the video, it just goes, kind of clicks. And she applies the brake. Then when she's driving, she can move the shifter into drive, and then slowly ease on the brake and ease off. Then when she's done with the car, this is another one of those processes that we just sometimes don't think of. Like, let's say you pull up to your parking spot, you apply the brake, turn the car off, but then when you get out of the car, you take your foot off. You don't leave your foot on the brake the whole time, otherwise your brake lights are going to be on. So she even goes through that process of like taking the brake off. And so this is what we're thinking through, is how do all of our body parts perform these different functions, and then how do we perform all of those functions with fewer body parts? So it's another part of the process. I'm just going to kind of leave the video there. And we'll talk about some other things here as far as transportation. We're going to kind of shift gears a little bit, but I want to keep moving here. Public transportation buses requiring lifts. So we've been talking about these like personal modifications to our home environment, our own cars. But when we talk about assistive technology, oftentimes we're also talking about how do we create a world that's more accessible for other people. And because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, public services need to be able to accommodate people. So whenever you see a bus, it has to have a bus lift. And that's just because it needs, for these very reasons. One of the questions that I have is, as our transportation, the way we transport ourselves and just sort of generally in our world, as that changes with things like Uber and Lyft and different kinds of business models that provide these different transportation options, what about adaptive requirements? So I just want to tell you a quick story. I was recently in San Diego for a conference, and somebody else was telling me a story about this, that there was a lady who was at the conference, and she had some mobility needs. I don't know if she was in a chair or what her situation was, but she would call different Uber drivers and say, I need a car that is accessible. Who can do this? And people kept, skipping over her, because I think as a driver, you can choose to take the job or not. And people would just be like, no, I don't have that, or no, I can't do that, or no, that's not something I provide or something I can offer. And so she waited for a long time just to get a car. Normally you wait for a couple minutes, or depending on busyness or whatever. But that's just one of those situations of there's now these different requirements, and the laws that we had that should apply to make it available for everybody to be able to transport themselves or get transportation from somebody else. The law doesn't have the same grip on new innovative ways of transportation. So there's kind of a lag in how do we get these companies to understand that they're responsible if they are. Now, I don't want to get into the details of this, but Uber and Lyft drivers aren't employees of a certain company, so the government can't sue that company to tell them to provide these assistive options, because they're independent contractors who kind of own their own business and just use Uber and Lyft for the service as sort of a referral system, more or less. So this is where it gets it's one of those awkward situations and uncomfortable and potentially unfair. When we talk about assistive technology, there are all these legal things to think about too, and we're not going to go into those legal things right now. But I just want to kind of highlight this is some of the problems or situations that people who have mobility needs get into. So if you can't transport yourself because you live in poverty or you don't have enough money or you lose your car because you have too many medical expenses and then somebody takes away your car because it's repossessed because you can't pay your loans, or there's so many situations where these things happen, then you have to rely on other people. And if they don't have if they can't accommodate your mobility needs, then life just gets harder. So anyway, I won't go too far down that road, but and also I'm not going to go too far down this one, but what about electric driverless fleet vehicles for the future? Now for a while there was kind of talk about, oh, we're going to have these electric cars all over the roads, and hey, maybe that's a good thing because maybe that means we can get out to these places that public transportation just can't go, because to send a person out there means that person's not getting paid wages, blah, blah, blah. But now if there's a driverless vehicle that can go, 2 hours out of the way and just, pick somebody up, or it might be less than that, but nevertheless, you get the idea. Maybe that would provide more accessibility, more options for people. It's looking now, and this is almost summer of 2022, it's looking now that driverless fleet of vehicles is not quite as realistic as we thought. Maybe we're a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it doesn't mean that it's not a possibility for the future. So when we're thinking of assistive technology, this is like, hey, this is going to work for everybody potentially, having a driverless vehicles, but it also could make options better for people with disabilities to be able to transport themselves, or to get transportation, I should say. So there's some things that, as we change and evolve as a society, or devolve, depending on how you look at it, could be either one, I guess. As society changes, there are hiccups and quirks, and some of them have to do with the laws and regulations and who owns what and all that stuff, but there's also great potential for some of this technology to be good. The moral of the story here with both of these cases is, are we thinking about all people when we're thinking about these changes being made, and are we making it useful for as many people as possible? This is the principle of universal design that we haven't talked about yet, but you may have heard it in other classes, or we will get to it in a second here. Okay, how are we doing on time? Half hour. Okay, so when it comes to self-help and personal care needs, you're going to find a lot of OTs, PTs, doctors have a lot of this stuff. You'll get lots of information from them. You'll just get exposure to all these things, but there are so many different little tiny tools. This one's been around for a long time. You may have seen this with your grandparents, have a harder time bending over, so they use a shoehorn. Just put it in the back of the heel, slide your foot in. Then you don't have to do that thing where you pick your foot up and put your finger down into your shoe, and then you just scrape your skin off your finger when you're putting your tight shoes on, that kind of thing. That's a shoehorn. It's just a piece of assistive technology. This one here, it's a little hard to see this probably on the video, but this is kind of like a little cup, and you put your sock over the cup, and then you have those two strings you hold. That way you can kind of toss your sock down on the ground, scoop it back up like you're, scooping. I can't think of a better way to say it right now. But you put your foot in it and then pull on those strings, and it pulls your sock up, and then you can pull that cup up and take it off your leg, and it's a sock assist thing. This little device right here helps with buttons. If you don't have fine motor movement of your fingers, that thing can help out with buttons in t-shirts and jackets and whatever. And there are so many other things, from the tasks of eating, drinking, brushing hair, brushing teeth, putting on clothes, dressing, bathing, toileting, tying shoes, etc. There's just all of these tasks that we sometimes take for granted. Somebody has found or developed a device that can help out with that thing. Or at least that's the goal. We try to. If you work in disability and you work in counseling, you might find somebody who comes in with these situations. Now, just a quick side note. If you're one of those people who says, I'm going to be a therapist, I'm not going to do this sort of rehabilitation counseling stuff. Of course, throughout this semester, hopefully you've seen that this is sort of the world of all of us, right? You don't have to be an expert in what are all these tools. What you have the opportunity to do is think creatively with somebody to try and make their life a little better. Whether that's giving them physical tools like this stuff, or psychological tools of how to think differently, reframe, avoid irrational thoughts, or come up with mantra phrases that help a person find motivation in times of despair or something like that. I mean, these are all technologies in a really broad sense, and they all assist people. So if you're the therapist who does not deal with this disability stuff, which is just arrogant and ignorant, frankly, to be a little bit blunt about it, but these are all things you can say, you know what, part of why you feel a little bit down, it sounds like, is because it's harder to do things that you used to do. Do you have a physical therapist? Do you have an occupational therapist? Are they the kind that are really doing their jobs well and they're helping you think creatively to get this stuff? Yes, I have one and they're okay. They gave me this thing the doctor prescribed. This is a common story, by the way. They gave me this stuff, but I don't know how to use it. I don't know what it means. They weren't trained on it. Or they gave me these things, but they don't work for me. And so I don't know what to do with them. Or, I could only afford because Medicaid would pay for these few different things, but I have all these other things that I would still like to do, like my hobbies and things that make me happy that I just can't do because I don't have a special device for them. What oftentimes we can do is to say, well, let's think of something. Let's come up with something. Maybe we have the expertise and the energy to, if you can get back to doing your crossword puzzles or whatever the thing is, that would improve your quality of life. And that's a mental health and physical health intervention, right? You can't walk? Well, let me see if I can put in a referral to the other so-and-so to see if we can help get you some funding to do this task or whatever. These are all ways to improve somebody's life, both mentally and physically. So if you're looking at this stuff thinking like, ugh, I don't do that, do it and be okay with it and say, it is my job. It's part of it because it's making someone's life better. So anyway, that's just my my sales pitch for the day, or one of them at least. Here are some examples of these kind of devices. Electric toothbrush. All of a sudden, I don't have to use my arm power to be ramming this thing back into my jowls. I can all of a sudden just stick this thing in and it goes zzz and buzzes. I find them to be weird. I don't use an electric toothbrush because it vibrates my teeth and also my brain and it tickles. That's the only reason. That's the only reason I don't do it. But if I had to, I'd get used to it and be fine. I already talked about shoehorn, sockeye. There's a ton of this stuff. And you can find this, by the way, one of the terms that you can look for is durable medical equipment. If you do a Google search for that, you'll find lots of websites that have different examples of all this stuff. Another thing that was mentioned in the book is that also consider some devices that might not be appropriate for all environments. If you Google sock guide, you'll find these big plastic things that might work better. But if you're, and you buy one for your home, but if you have to travel, like if your job is, sort of requires business travel or something like this is probably going to be a lot more appropriate just because it's smaller. It could fit as a sort of travel size version of your sock guide. So you might not only need one of these things, but depending on your job or your living situation, your environment, you might need multiple or different kinds. And so it's important to think of those kind of circumstances of like, hey, is this going to work for you in all environments? Okay, maybe we need to look at a different one. If you can only afford one, let's buy this one instead of the other bigger one. Or if you can afford to, then you're going to have options, that kind of thing. So something worth considering. This is a good point. When it comes to home management or safety, we're talking about things like cooking, cleaning, turning on lights, locking doors, hearing doorbells, hearing smoke alarms, can openers, lowered cabinets that are more easy to reach through, that kind of thing. This extends to shoveling snow, mowing lawns, landscaping, all that kind of stuff. Again, we've already mentioned this point, but different devices are unique to suit the needs of individuals. And we've already talked about this too. Many devices used in homes for people without disabilities. For example, think of how much the microwave made cooking easier. So this is, again, we're thinking of assistive technology broadly. Think of like, what do they call those things? I forget the brand name of the smart thermostat in the room that can be controlled with a phone. All of a sudden, I don't have to get up and walk over to the thing on the wall and push the button. I can control the phone and the lights and my refrigerator and my toaster even and the locks on the doors and my robotic curtains that open and close. And there's so many more things that are controlled via phone in sort of our smart homes. Now, these do come with security risks, right? There's this new world of, could this potentially be a problem later on? And we get to sort of work through this as a culture because we haven't quite figured all this out yet. These high-tech items, they come at an expense. Some people can't afford that. They come with security risks, and some people don't want to take that. So as you're going through these things, could they make someone's life better? Yes, but at what cost? And this is just what counselors do, is they work through all the potential risks and benefits and decide if this is, with the person, if this is going to be a good fit for them. So I tend to be more on the scale, just because, not that you guys care, but I tend to be more on the side of the scale of this technology can do some pretty cool things. Like I actually wanted to make some robotic curtains that open and close my curtains at the push of a button. Do I need that? No. Is it going to make my life better? Probably not, but it's super fun. So for me, I know that doing those kind of activities, it's more just a hobby for me. But somebody could really benefit from this. I've met quite a few people who are like, the only way that I can manage my home is because I have so many different needs, not just, opening and closing your curtains, but that extends to spending time in the kitchen and cooking and that kind of thing. The more of these things we have, the more of these devices, the less we need somebody else in our lives to be doing them for us, which creates independence, right? So there are pros and cons to this stuff, and this is not a philosophical debate about, is the world going to turn into like a Terminator space where machines control our minds and that kind of stuff? Of course, we could talk about that, but that's not the purpose of what we're doing today. Let's talk about communication. These are two versions of a sensory, what are they called? I'm blanking on the name now, but when we're talking about communication and sensory needs, we're talking about communication devices. This one is just simply a PDF that I printed off of Pinterest or something, where somebody could point to these different emotions or functions or needs or whatever, and this could be totally modified to fit individual needs. This one is something similar to, a tablet device that can also speak that word out loud if a person pushes on it, which obviously has more functions than this one, or it could potentially. There are lots of versions of this. There are free apps that you can download. There's all kinds of different ways to do this kind of thing. But for a person with communication needs, these are kind of a big deal. Excuse me. I'm trying to I'm having a little brain fart here. So speaking, writing, reading, hearing, signing, nonverbal behaviors, this is all the stuff we're talking about here. This thing you see behind me, a magnifying glass. There is, I think this video here, I'm not going to go to it, but this is a digital magnifier, which is basically a phone app. So somebody takes their phone and they hold their camera up to the book that they're looking at. And it's a really neat video because when you see this guy, he can take pictures at the same time. He can change the colors. So if somebody needs to not only magnify, but to sort of visually change the color of something, that app can do it. And there's all kinds of different functions that this thing has, which is really kind of cool. It can even do things like if the book is upside down, like if you're looking at a menu at a restaurant, you can put your phone over to your somebody across the table and put your camera on it so you can see it, but then flip it upside down so you can read it and they can read it at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, that might seem kind of clumsy for some of us, but at the same time, like, I kind of would like that because it's sort of fun. So universally, things like that could be really helpful, even if it's not just specifically for me to magnify something, which is, again, going back to that universal design stuff. These here, we've talked about this before, but eyeglasses. These are assistive technology. I would not be able to see great distances if I did not have these. So these make my life easier and better, and they help me function, right? My disability is one of sight. This is an interesting video about the artificial larynx. Most of us have probably heard or seen those commercials back when, like in the 90s or early 2000s or whatever, like, beware of the smoking hazards, you're going to get cancer, that kind of stuff. And you have somebody who lost their larynx because of smoking, or didn't lose it, but like they had to have this artificial larynx. And it sounds like a robotic, that kind of sound. This one, because of technology and advancements in it, it can fluctuate the. I'm gonna get this wrong. This is embarrassing, but it can fluctuate the pitch of a person's voice. So now all of a sudden it sounds like it can go up and down, and it can sound like a little bit higher and a little bit lower, which is important in our fluctuation of our voice to sound more natural. It still sounds robotic to some extent, but much easier to understand and much more just better in general for people to use that in terms of a person's self concept. This also includes dictation software like Dragon Naturally Speaking, if you've ever heard of that. Somebody that has a hard time typing can talk into a microphone and it can type on the screen. I don't want to go into that too much, even though that's probably one of the most widely used pieces of assistive technology for people with learning disabilities and physical disabilities, and there's all kinds of things, especially on college campuses, which is where my background mostly comes from. Recreation, again, this is another one of those areas where there's just, whether you do crossword puzzles, you play badminton, you go skiing, you play cards, whatever. I actually own these things, these card holders. My mom plays a ton of cards, and she brought those to my house because my wife uses them to hold lots of cards because she can't hold that many. Also, my son, who is 4 years old, he uses these too because his hands are tiny, right? There are times when I play games where I use these too because it's fun, because then I can sit and eat cookies while I'm playing games. I don't have to hold a bunch of stupid cards, which just, I don't know if that makes my life better or just, more jiggly, who knows? But nevertheless, it's useful. Universal design, right? I was up at Big Sky. I live in Montana, and Big Sky is like 2 hours away. It's a big ski resort, and I was there with a friend, and we were in this kind of the back bowl right under Lone Peak, so it's kind of like off in the more rough territory, Black Diamond territory. And this lady comes down with these things, and she is just absolutely crushing it. Like we're up there for the first time, like, I don't know, it's kind of scary. And she comes down, she's like, "Nying, nying, nying." And she's like, "Oh, I'm paralyzed from the neck down." And we're like, "Wait, okay, so tell me more about this." She's like, "I can't feel my legs. I have a little bit of sensation in my foot, but really, I feel the hill or the mountain with my hands." And so she's standing upright. She has enough control of her muscles to stand upright and move her hips and stuff with her core body strength, but she can't really feel her legs, so she kind of just holds them together stationary and then feels the hill with her hands and kind of guides herself with those. She was awesome. So we took a video of her and then met her at the bottom and gave her phone back and that kind of stuff. She was so cool. I wanted to talk to her more, but I just didn't get a chance to. Also, some of you if you've been skiing, you've seen something like this before where you can sit down on a single ski. It's a very similar concept. Use your these things attached to your hands to move around. This guy, don't really know this game, but I'm pretty sure that's Grand Theft Auto, and he's got this big pad in front of him with all of the buttons that would normally be on a hand control, this kind of thing. So he's a gamer. He's playing some games. I don't know what else there is to say about that except for adaptive gaming is a thing, and that's an area where there's not a ton of options here. There are some, but there's not a lot of people making adaptive controllers, I would imagine. So this could be an area where if you have a client who's like, "I love video games, they're so awesome, but I can't play them because of this thing," whatever, then obviously there's this option, and there are others I've seen. So let's keep going. Cognitive memory or learning aids. Most of us use a calendar because we can't keep in our heads, our memories just aren't good enough to keep our entire calendar. And that's why we use a piece of assistive technology like a calendar, either digital or on paper. It doesn't really matter. It could be low-tech paper, it could be high-tech phone thing. But it's the same thing that we're talking about here in the spirit of assistive technology. It makes our lives more organized, helps us be more independent, helps us get more done, that kind of thing. To-do lists, checklists, that kind of thing. The low-tech version is just the sticky note, right? Some of us still use those. That's our memory. I use a high-tech version on my phone that I can also share with my wife. So we have like shared grocery lists and shared shopping lists and that kind of stuff, which is nice for families because then they can say, I just put bread and milk on the grocery list, and then she goes to the grocery store and pulls it up and say, oh, wasn't there another thing? Oh yeah, don't worry, I just put it on the list. And helps communities and teams and families organize in different ways. But this is all the same kind of stuff. There are bunches of examples of different things like this, so I'm not going to go through those. The one thing to kind of be wary of, though, is that if you hear people say, like, this is a memory enhancement game, it's kind of a ploy to get you to click on things, and it's a ploy to get you to spend time and attention on things that are supposed to improve your memory, but may not necessarily. It might just, like, there may be no evidence that it does that. So if you have somebody who has a learning disability, or you have somebody who has a need for, or they have a desire to sort of improve their memory or their mental calisthenics or something, just be kind of wary of these things that say, we improve your memory, we improve your attention span, we improve all this stuff, because it's not necessarily true all the time. Other examples, calculators, voice recorders, smartphones. That's just related to this other stuff above. Here's a video. I was going to actually bring mine in, but I just forgot to this morning. A Live Scribe Smart Pen. So this is a pen that you can, they cost like $100 maybe, but you can write on a piece of paper. Actually, let's watch this one. Let me pause it because it's kind of cool. I just want to show it to you.
The
Okay,
Live
we're already
Scribe
going.
3
Check this
Smart
out.
Pen turns your words into action. Your handwritten notes instantly appear on your tablet or smartphone. Once on your device, it's easy to convert your handwriting into text and send it to your friends or colleagues. Your tablet or smartphone can record audio as you write to capture the things you don't.
Hi, this is Mr. Green. I'm calling to confirm my reservation on April 18th.
Certainly, I have you down for 2 people
Okay,
at
for the sake of
7:30
time,
p.m.
I'm not going to keep going with that
And
one.
your
But the way this works is at the tip of this little pen, there's a camera inside there, and it records the movements of your pen, and then it uploads it to a tablet, obviously in real time. This is like a newer version than the one I had, but it's probably like Bluetooth or something. The other thing this does is that if you record these notes like this, you get them in digital format. If you hit that record button at the bottom of the page, and this is special paper that you have to buy, if you hit the record button, you can then go to, like, this part of, let's say you're a student in a classroom, you can hit the playback button and it'll play whatever you recorded from this point. Or if you say, that was right around that time he was talking about dates that Aaron said something that I wanted to remember, you actually just sort of tap the screen right here and it'll play back from that point in the lecture. So it matches up the audio recording with the notes that you wrote. Really kind of cool. It also does these really useless but awesome things, like if you draw a picture of a keyboard, you can play the different notes. It knows which note you're playing. So you can play Hangman on it. I mean, there's just tons of cool stuff you can do with them. But I never, even though I have one, I never went through the learning curve of making it really useful in my life. And also, it's a little bulky. These ones are a lot better now, but they were a little bulky, so I just didn't carry it around a lot. I still think I missed an opportunity there. I would have loved to get good at this because it could make my notes so much better. One thing, I stopped right before you got to this point in the video, but when you put down a date like this, it can automatically sync with your calendar. And so there's just a whole bunch of like functions like this that I never got used to it. I'm a relatively comfortable person when it comes to technology and like to sort of embrace these new opportunities. But even this, I think, is something that I struggled to figure out how to make useful in my life. And so I gave up on it. And it's a perfect principle to describe, like, the learning curve was so steep that I just kind of like lost the motivation. And that's something I'm gonna jump back to here as we move forward a little more. So we'll come back to this idea of, is it useful? A person might like the idea of liking it, but it just doesn't work. And so this is, as counselors, we get to think about, okay, it's not working for you. Should we try and make it work? Try and figure out new ways to make it work? Or should we just abandon it altogether and say there's a different solution we're going to find? Something like that. Want to mention workplace modification really quick, because this often comes up when it comes to assistive technology. If somebody's on the job, if you're working as like a voc rehab counselor, somebody gets a job and they say, I will work here, but I can't get in the place of work because there's stairs. So can you accommodate this by putting a wheelchair access in? And the technical term here in the Americans with Disabilities Act is reasonable accommodation. You'll hear this word a lot. What is reasonable? Well, can a person reasonably make those changes to their workplace that don't impose financial hardship on an employer? Because oftentimes this is what you'll hear. I would hire a person with a disability, but it's too expensive to train them. It's too expensive to deal with all the, in personnel issues. It's too expensive to modify the environment. And so we're just not going to do it. And so the conversation often goes back to money. What is financial hardship on a person? Employers usually think that anything is a financial hardship, and we get to say, well, but most of these aren't that expensive, or they're not as difficult as you might think. I've seen lots of people work. I shouldn't say this. I've seen some people have this conversation where they say, okay, well, you don't necessarily need to spend thousands on pouring concrete to make a ramp in front of your business. You have this other door, it's just not wide enough. So if you spend $500 having the contractor come out and just widening that door space, or instead of 2 French doors, only one of them opens, you make sliding doors or something like that, where a person could fit a wheelchair through, and they're like, oh, okay, well then if that's possible, this is fine. This will work out just fine. And so oftentimes it's just working through this with people and sort of relieving their doubts of all the fear of it being expensive or too difficult or something like that. I've also heard on the flip side of a person who said they had some like allergies or chemical sensitivity or something like that. And this was at a school, and she said, because the chemistry labs in this side of the school don't filter out enough of the chemicals, like, when you walk by a chemistry lab and there's like formaldehyde or something like that you can sometimes smell. She said, I need the school to replace the entire HVAC system with something that's more powerful, because I can't be in this building and I need to attend here in order to have schooling. So it's not accessible for me because of the fumes. But that meant tens of thousands of dollars, which would definitely put the school at a place of financial hardship. And so it was determined that would not be reasonable. It's not a reasonable accommodation. However, now we have different opportunities for online learning, so maybe she can get her education that way. So anyway, you kind of see the conversation here a little bit, hopefully. Oh man, okay, we got a bunch of slides here to go. I'm going to try and make this quick. Things to consider when you're doing an assessment like this. The types of devices depends on location, of course. Is the person rural? Are they local? Do they have access to concrete so they can roll out of their car, or they have a gravel driveway, stuff like that. The degree of benefit. A robotic arm might help you pick up a cup, but the cost versus what it actually provides you may not be that much. So you get to think about, how much can we spend versus what you get out of it. And this is what you get to help people work through. The physical environment, kind of already mentioned that. A wheelchair ramp could be good, but if there's a curb in front of it, it's basically useless. So don't build the ramp if there's a curb there. So it's kind of thinking with a little foresight is what we get to practice when we do this kind of stuff. The psychosocial environment is also a really important point. If you say, let's just, you just lost an arm in this industrial accident, let's get you a hook that you can use so you can get back to work, great. But if the person's like, I'm not wearing the frickin' hook, man, everybody around's going to tease me, and I'm going to be ostracized in the break rooms because of the way that I look or whatever. And so we're not just thinking about like what provides the most functioning. Is this just about physical functioning and getting back to your own physical independence, blah, blah, blah. It's about how are other people going to take this? What's the social and cultural environment around this person? And is this tool going to be useful for them given the potential ridicule they might experience later on? So we're also really sensitive to emotional and social realities in a person's life too. And then this point about somebody might have values that deter them from using these devices. In other words, if you have somebody who has a hearing difficulty and they say, my hearing is not the problem. Some people believe that deafness is not a disability. It's the hearing culture that just does not get it. And so if a person has that kind of attitude, then suggesting that they should just use hearing aids, and if they don't, they're being resistant and all that kind of stuff, it's not really going to help. It's not going to help anybody. So it's kind of pointless to get into those kind of debates. We as counselors are susceptible to getting defensive as well. So if you're like, well, I gave a person money to do the thing and they don't want to do it, that's not really helping you or them. And so those are things that kind of our personal biases that we need to work through. Otherwise, we get burned out and we get jaded and we get pessimistic and we sort of lose our hope and our helpfulness. I see this all the time with people who work in different VR settings, is saying, I know what's best. I gave a person an opportunity. They didn't want to take it, so screw them. I'm being a little bit blunt today, but you kind of get the idea that we can build our own resistance. And if we have resistance to the clients versus them resistant to what we have to offer, it just, the relationship deteriorates. And counseling depends on good relationships, depends on trust, and it depends on knowing that other people are going to have barriers. And if we build our own barriers, then there's just, we're not going to be functional or helpful as professionals. So worth mentioning that. This is a good sentence that I want to highlight. The success of assistive devices is determined by the degree to which they match the goals and perspectives of the individual, rather than the device's potential usefulness for any particular day-to-day activity. It's just a repetition of what we've already been talking about. I know that this thing might make their life better, but if they don't know that and they don't use it and they don't, if they're not doing it, then it's not going to be helpful. It's not going to help them, make them more successful. It'd be like saying I'm a physical therapist and I know these exercises are going to be good for a person, but they're not doing them, and so then it's their fault. Now we're getting into the territory of who's responsible for putting in the energy to make these things work. Well, in some environments you might say, well, I gave them all they needed and they're not doing it. They're not taking their medication. They're not doing their exercises. They're not doing their homework outside of counseling, so therefore it's their fault. And yet the person's not getting better. So who takes responsibility for doing things different? Well, the point is that it's a collaboration. It's a collaborative effort together. And so sometimes you might have to humble yourself, maybe more often than you think you should, humble yourself to say, well, if it's not working, let me see if I can do something differently for me. Here's another example. This is important, so I want to make sure I touch on this, even though I'm over time, big time. If I'm doing counseling and people are coming into my office and they're just saying like, well, I keep coming back to counseling, but I'm not getting better. I don't have control over all parts of their life. They do. But what I do have control over is how I approach the situation. So if they're not able to talk about a certain thing because they're not able to trust me, then I can say, well, let me see if I can build a little bit more trust. Let me try some new things. Change my approach, change my personality, try something that would be sort of outside of my comfort zone of my character to do a different thing because I can control that, right? So same thing kind of here. If a person is not successful, I have the ability to look at my goals. What are my goals for this person? And say, let's not worry about my goals. Let's figure out what's going to help them. So anyway, a person's energy level, if they get fatigued by the use of that thing, they're not going to use it. If they don't have a learning tolerance for high-tech stuff, if they're like, I don't want a cell phone, I don't need that crap, then they're not going to use it. It's not going to work, right? If a device is difficult to operate, just like my smart pen that I was just talking about here a second ago, my motivation and my success at learning it is going to decline because it's hard to use. It's hard to integrate into my daily life. Doesn't mean I couldn't do it more and I couldn't put more energy and effort into it, but it's challenging. And then cosmetic appearance, we've already talked about that too. Okay, let me see how much we got left. Cultural devices, I've already mentioned that, but when it comes to high-tech stuff, there is a sense in America right now that technology is part of the establishment and big data is going to take over our lives and that kind of thing. That's a person's cultural value, and that might dissuade them from buying things like smart devices in the home or part of the it's called the IoT, or the Internet of Things, especially if you hear like 5G is going to increase the speed and capacity for us to use more things, or for more things to be attached to the internet. That's why 5G is a thing, not just to make us, be able to watch YouTube faster. But if we have a fridge and a thermostat and our locks and all these things are on the internet, that means it's taking up bandwidth. So 5G is for that purpose. But if a person says, yeah, but our risk to personal security and personal information and all that stuff, then that stuff is not going to be useful for them. So don't push it, I guess. Also consider mechanically or electrically complicated devices need repair. If things have the more moving parts, the more things could go wrong, which means oftentimes the more frequent they're going to need repairs, and the more expensive they're going to be if they're unique. And so the point is, an adapted van might be the thing that increases a person's independence, but if they don't have a repair shop in their local area, someone's going to have to drive in, which means additional cost. A specialist is going to have to look at that stuff, which means additional cost. So think about future potential costs along with it, not just present functioning, that kind of thing. Just because it's new and high tech does not make it tested and valuable to individuals. In other words, does it actually work? Those are things that we're going to be asking ourselves. Can the device be upgraded or expanded? So potential future expansion of the device, or is it kind of like a one-time thing that does one specific job? It'd be like saying, I'm going to buy a fork for my kitchen because I can do lots of things in the kitchen with a fork. But if I buy a mandolin, which is like a slicing, cutting tool, it does basically one thing. It's not that useful, right? Can't be upgraded, can't be expanded, takes up space, all that stuff. Don't ignore aesthetics. I think we've already covered that a little bit. Can the knowledge of bureaucratic structures interfere? Well, let me say this differently. Bureaucratic structures, meaning, okay, I say I work at Voc Rehab and I buy somebody a device, but if there's a potential for later on saying, I don't have the funding, or someone's going to deny you the funding, somebody gets used to using that thing, and then there's a potential they won't have access to it in the future, then it's not that helpful to spend all that time getting used to it and then not having it. So thinking about where the funding is coming from is an important consideration as well. I've already mentioned this point that individuals must be involved in decision making. To this point, there are certain kinds of technology, even in the assistive technology world, where they become really popular. For a while, it was the iPad. It was like the newest hit thing, and there's going to be so many apps. There's an app for everything. And so people were flooding money into Apple saying, like, let's buy iPads for everybody. Here, we just bought a whole bunch of them. It's going to be good for everybody. So people were just throwing out iPads at people without even asking if they wanted them. And I've heard from several clients, they said, like, I went into Voc Rehab and my counselor gave me an iPad and I can watch TV on it, but like, I don't know what to do with it. Like, I don't even want this thing. I want this other stuff. It's like, I want my house to be modified. I don't want another iPad, so don't give me that stuff. But we kind of get into that mindset of like, here's the package that we're willing to provide. Go take it. But if the person doesn't want it, it's just kind of a waste of time and money and resources. Okay, this is the last one here. I told you we were going to talk about universal design, and now here we go. I'm not going to talk about all these different principles just for the sake of time, but the whole point is that universal design makes life easier and more functional for everybody. The classic example is the curb cuts. Before we figured out that, we're going to cut out the curb at every intersection so that people with bikes and people walking and people with strollers and stuff, that wasn't always the case. But people with mobility issues, like parents with strollers, people with walkers, people with canes, trying to navigate their outside world. Before that, there was a curb there, right? And somebody said, well, let's just make a cutout. It's going to make everybody's life better. That's the principle with universal design. If we find some new way of doing something or new technology, device or whatever, if it makes everybody's life better, or at least most people, then that's following the principles of universal design. And here's some guidelines to think about when you're thinking about that stuff. So we're just not going to talk about it right now. But anyway, okay, that's it. I'm done for the day. And for some of you, potentially forever. This might be the last you ever hear from me. So if that's the case, thank you for sticking with me for an hour and 10 minutes. This is for the last one. And I will hopefully talk to you later. And what I always say to people is hopefully our paths will cross somewhere in the future if it's not soon. Okay, see ya.